So today I'm going to be talking about creating a lean, mean Drupal 8 theme. And I'll be talking about a lot of theming concepts in general, and then getting on to Drupal 8 midway through the presentation. Just to introduce myself, my name's Suzanne Dergachova. I work at Evolving Web up in Montreal, and we do a lot of Drupal development work. We also run a training program, and we work with clients in lots of different sectors, like higher education, government, nonprofits, and corporations. And I focus mainly on theming, site building, and I work with a team of developers. And I also run a Drupal training program as part of the company. And we're offering a whole new set of Drupal 8 trainings now that Drupal 8's out, which we're really excited about. We have a training coming up in New Orleans if you're heading down to DrupalCon on May 9th. And then we're coming back to Atlanta May 16th and 17th to do a couple of trainings down here. So if you're interested, or if you know people who want to get into Drupal, have some colleagues who could stand to learn something about Drupal, you can send them over to our website, evolvingweb.ca/training, and we have an Atlanta page set up there. You can go find out more, or you can come talk to me after the presentation. So the theme of this talk is minimalist theming. So how to create a theme that's easy to maintain and, you know, something that you'll want to work on for years to come, that's robust and works well, and all these great things. And where this talk comes from is my experience as a theme developer. I work on a lot of different types of projects, and a lot of these projects have multiple developers, or they're projects that we've inherited from other Drupal shops. And so I'll come across a theme that maybe I built a few years ago, or maybe that somebody else created, and I look at it and I see, you know, 100 template files, too many regions, a giant template.php file or a theme file, and so much CSS that I don't know what to do with. And then I look over at the configuration of the site, and I see so much configuration, just layers and layers of modules being used to control the display of the site, things like panels and views and display suite and field collections, and all these modules working together to control what the site looks like. And it just makes a project very intimidating. You know, before you can even begin work to add one little piece, you have to understand this giant theming system and display management tools. And so what I'm going to talk about today is, first of all, why Drupal themes end up being so complex. Like, where does all of this complexity come from? Why do you have 100 templates on a website? That doesn't seem so complicated. What does Drupal 8 add to the mix? So now that Drupal 8's come out, how does that affect how we make themes? What are the new tools, and how should we deal with this? And finally, how can we manage and limit the complexity? So what can we actually do in our day-to-day work as themers to make sure that the themes that we're building, we're able to pass off to other people, and they won't hate us. So before I start, how many of you do theming? I sort of was sitting in the front row. I didn't see the hands up before. Okay, so some of you do theming. How many of you are like reluctant themers? Like, you have to do some theming, but you're like, theming. Okay, so most people here are touching the theme one way or the other. Great. So first of all, where does complexity come from? You think, oh, Drupal themes, like, I kind of know there's templates, there's CSS, like, why are they so complicated? So there's three main sources of complexity that I see. So first of all, the fact that Drupal themes are so flexible means you can add all kinds of components to them. And this can make them complex. There's also a lot of configuration we can do in Drupal. So there's a lot of things you can do in Drupal using the theme or in configuration. So this also adds complexity, because the theming and the configuration kind of have to work hand in hand. And finally, the design process can add a lot of complexity because you have so many front-end requirements. So first of all, yes, the Drupal theme system is very flexible. And as Drupal developers, I think we really have a lot of pride in this. You know, somebody comes to us who uses another platform or they're new to Drupal, and they ask, oh, can Drupal do this? Like, can you change the output of Drupal in this way? Or can you create pages that look like this? And we just want to say yes. We want to say, oh yeah, Drupal can do that because Drupal's the best. You know, it's our tool. We want to stick up for it. And so we're always really happy that Drupal is a flexible system. But sometimes its flexibility also means that we don't kind of put limits on what we do with our themes. So there's a few tools we can use in the theme system that make it so flexible. First of all, let's say a client comes to us and they say, okay, we have this website and we have many different layouts that we need. You know, we want all the pages kind of to have their own unique look, like it's a really visual site. And we as themers say, great, no problem, we can add templates. So this, I hope the font is small enough that you can't really see the names of the templates and figure out who the client is, but I inherited this theme that had over 100 templates. I think this was after I'd already cleaned a few of them out. I think there were about 11-page templates and this field collection templates, and the views templates are all in a separate folder there, so we're not even seeing the full picture here. So yeah, unfortunately, Drupal doesn't come with a theme, a template police that says, oh, you have now too many templates. Sorry, you cannot add any more. Drupal is very flexible, so the sky is really the limit in terms of how many templates you can add. What about adding display logic to our nodes or to our pages? Often we'll get projects where this is a requirement. You know, you have a university site, you have a program page, you want to embed the courses related to the program in the page, and sure, you can write a preprocess function that will do that. Or you want to create a page that lists courses, and your courses have dates associated with them. So for each date, there's some information. You can write a preprocess function that'll pull in that information. Or you can use preprocess functions to insert icons in your content. And so again, the sky's kind of the limit in terms of preprocess functions in our theme. And sometimes I think as themers, we can get a little bit carried away because we think, oh yeah, we can do that, it's easy, I can do anything with a preprocess function. A lot of times with Drupal, we also get really specific design requirements. And so just like anytime you're making a theme, you're creating a custom theme because there is a custom look and feel. So you might be working on a website that has a really distinctive look, maybe a brochure website or a corporate website that has to implement a certain branding. I'm working on a website right now for a comic book store, and their website looks a little bit like a comic book. So this requires a lot of really custom CSS. And so Eric was talking this morning about managing CSS and kind of how to structure our CSS so that it makes sense and so that different people can work on it, which is all great. But this doesn't quite limit the amount of CSS we can add. And sometimes I think, especially when we're using tools like SASS, we forget how much CSS is actually being produced by the SASS. This is just a segment of the blocks .scss file of one of the themes that I'm working on. I did not write all this code, but I mean, I could have if I was the one creating the theme, because the design was so specific. You know, there were so many requirements specific to different pages. So the Drupal theme system is really flexible. So we get all kinds of tools we have there that we can use. Drupal configuration is also really powerful. And so on top of the theme, we often have layers and layers of configuration that we're using. So maybe you start off your project, and I don't know how many of you are the type of themer where you want to do everything in the theme. Is anyone like that? Anyone say like, oh, forget panels, I want to do it with the theme, like with my custom regions? Sometimes you get themers like this who want to do everything in the theme. So the other extreme is people who want to do everything in configuration. Like, oh, there's a module for that. I'm not going to customize it in my theme. So, for example, you might have a page title, and you want to add to many of the page titles, you want to add some kind of a byline or subtitle underneath the title. And you could do this maybe with a preprocess function, or you could do it with a view and say, okay, for all the titles of all the pages on my site, I'll just create a view that displays the page title and this little byline that pulls out some of the fields from the current node. So there's lots of things you might be able to do in a theme. You could also do them just as well with a view. So you're going to end up with all kinds of views on your site that are display logic related. Other times on your site, you might want to group fields together. So let's say you're listing events on your site, and events can have different dates, like repeating dates. And you have this date information and location information for every instance of an event. And you can do this in many different ways, but one way to just use a preprocess function to take all these fields and kind of group them together. Or you might decide to use field collections. So with field collections, you have configuration that you can use to control how all these fields will be displayed, and you can do almost all of it through the configuration without even using your view. You might have a site where you're displaying content in many different contexts. And I don't know how many of you use Display Suite for Drupal 7, some of you. Yeah, so view modes are one way of displaying the same content in different ways depending on the context. And now in Drupal 8 we have view modes built into core, so this is an even more kind of appealing way of doing things. Some websites we create might have a lot of different layouts that are very distinct. And so we decide instead of using theming to control the layout, we're going to use a module like panels or display suite. So all of this configuration kind of adds to the complexity of our theme, because our theme all of a sudden depends on all of these modules being configured in a certain way. And so we have this extra interaction between theme and configuration. So we have the theme system itself, which creates complexity. We have all of our configuration, which adds this extra layer. And then on top of all of that, on our team, we might have some designers. Are there any designers in the room? Yeah, we love our designers. Yes, we rely on them. But designers can also add complexity to a project, because designers can create lots of variations of things. So when you're creating a Drupal site, typically all your pages will look the same unless you create the differences with the theme. But on paper or in Photoshop or Illustrator or your design tool of choice, the default is kind of to create variation. So normally things are going to look different depending on which page you're designing. So adding some more specifics to this, we can create lots of variations in terms of look and feel of different components on our site. So different buttons could all have a very distinct look. We might have regions on our site that are completely different from one page to the next. So on paper, this is easy to do. You just kind of drag and drop the components around. But as soon as you try and implement this in a theme, you're adding a lot of complexity and kind of logic to your theme. One thing that happens sometimes in the design process is that you get a lot of design that's attached to content. So the designer, the client might decide, okay, each of these pages has got to look different, and it's arbitrary. It's just depending on which node you're looking at. Or in the drop-down menu, we have 5 different items, and each drop-down mega menu type thing has to look different. The layout should be different, the content, the colors, and then adding some complexity to your task as a themer. Landing pages. So sites, marketing websites, corporate websites, have landing pages to highlight the, highlight the most important content in a section of the website. And this is a really great marketing tool, but it can pose a real challenge to your theme because each landing page might have a really distinctive look or a completely different layout. These screenshots are from a project I was working on where the designer delivered maybe 4 or 5 designs for distinct landing pages, and each deck, which I guess, I don't know, people have different names for them, but the different rows of content on the landing page, each one was designed uniquely with a completely different look. You know, the text would be left aligned and the image right aligned, or it would be dark on light, or sometimes there would be a call to action or a video, and I don't think there were 2 of these decks that had the same look and feel. So usually I'm not the best at saying no to clients, but I found it pretty motivating to say, you know, this is not an acceptable design pattern. We need to create some consistency between the decks and these landing pages. So what we settled on were about 5 or 6 options for different deck designs, either light on dark, dark on light, left or right aligned, and then we had the option of adding a call to action or a set of videos. So just to recap, if you're looking at a theme and you're seeing that it's really complex and you're wondering how did this happen, probably due to at least 1 or 2 of these things, a flexible theme system where the theme was built out in a way that was a little bit too verbose, a lot of configuration being applied to the site that's display related, and then a design that adds a lot of unique elements and kind of variations, and throwing that into the mix. So already, you know, with Drupal 7, we have this ability to create really complex themes. And you've probably seen examples of themes that have kind of gone a little over the top. And now Drupal 8's coming out. And we're all really excited as themers. And we have all these new tools we can use. And now what does this look like for us in terms of Drupal 8 theming? Like what does this mean? So Drupal 8 theming has lots of new features, and we've been hearing about them today. There have been lots of theme talks, which is great. So we've heard about using libraries. We've talked about Twig. There was that presentation. You've probably heard about the new core themes for Drupal 8, classy and stable. And there's also breakpoints built into Drupal 8. So there's all kinds of new tools. And you might get the sense, and this is somewhat true, that Drupal 8 is more minimalist in certain ways in terms of the front end. So by default in Drupal 8, we don't have JavaScript loading for anonymous users. We have this SMAC style categorization of CSS, so it's a really, you know, kind of better organized CSS system out of the box. We have HTML5 markup in place, so we don't have to implement that in our theme, it's already there. We have this stable theme that's the default for Drupal 8 that's very minimalistic, that doesn't add a lot of classes or extra markup that you don't need. It's more accessible out of the box, so you might not have to customize it so much if you have accessibility needs. And you can also use decoupled Drupal, so you can do away with the front end completely. But just because Drupal is a little bit more minimalistic out of the box, it doesn't mean that we can't make our Drupal 8 themes incredibly complex. So all the same challenges in Drupal 8 are there that we had in Drupal 7. And now that Drupal 8 is out and we're working on upgrading sites and working on new projects, I think now is a good time to kind of reassess how we make themes and to make an effort to make our themes more consistent and more maintainable. So I'll go and walk through some of these new features and tools that we have in Drupal 8 and how we can kind of approach them from a minimalist perspective. So first of all, our core themes. How many of you have used Drupal 8 and have used stable or classy? So even if you've used Drupal 8 and you built a theme from scratch, you've already used the stable theme. The stable theme is kind of the default one. Yeah, woohoo! It's the default one, so even if you don't declare a base theme, you're extending the stable theme. And stable, it sounds like it's the minimalist choice. It sounds like if you really want to be minimalist, you're going to go with stable, because it doesn't add so many classes. If you look at an example template file, you can see on the left, well, maybe you can see, on the left, you have the HTML template file from the stable theme, and it doesn't add any body classes, whereas the classy theme does. The classy theme adds all those classes that we're used to from Drupal 7 core. We have a class for whether or not you're logged in, and several other classes there you can probably see. So it might seem more minimalistic to go with the stable theme and just not use classy. But you have to keep in mind that you want to make a theme that's as maintainable as possible. So if you're planning on using some of these classes that classy provides, you're going to have to override your templates to put those in place. So you're going to have to add more templates to your theme to add those classes. So if you do need those classes, rather than going with stable, it would probably be a better choice to go with classy, because then you'll be avoiding maintaining those templates yourself. So we can use the work that's been done on classy. I think most theme developers will want to use the classy theme unless they're using some other kind of base theme. Libraries are another thing that are new in Drupal 8. How many of you have set up libraries? Yeah, some of you. So libraries, just as a little overview, libraries are the new way of loading CSS and JavaScript assets in Drupal 8. So you have, in addition to your info file, you have this libraries file where you can set up different kind of styling groupings of CSS and JavaScript. So for example, you might have on your site a set of global styling that you want to use, that you want to load everywhere. And you might have other CSS that's more contextual that you only want to load in certain places on your site. So for example, the search styling library, you probably would only want to load that on your search page. Or if you have a set of search pages, you might want to load it on several pages on your site. So you can attach libraries either globally in your info file. You can tell Drupal, I want to load this library on every page where my theme is being used. Or you can attach libraries contextually. So in a template file, you can tell Drupal, I want to attach my search styling library like this. Or in your theme file, you can attach libraries either using an attachments alter function or using a preprocess function. So this gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of loading these theme assets in our site. And this is a great thing for us in terms of designing our themes in a consistent way, because it really encourages you to think through the different contexts on your site and when you might need to load different assets. It also makes it really explicit in your libraries file what all the different chunks of CSS there are. Rather than just arbitrarily using Drupal add CSS, you're really going in and specifically saying, here's this set of CSS that has a specific context, or a bundle of CSS and JavaScript. So it makes sense to use libraries when there's a significant amount of really specific CSS and or JavaScript that you need to load in a certain section of your site. So if you have a store or you have a really advanced search section with a lot of custom CSS and JavaScript, then this makes a lot of sense. But I can sense already, in terms of the Drupal 8 projects that we've looked at, that there's going to be a temptation to add a lot of libraries because it's this new tool and we're all excited to use it. And so we're going to be like, oh yeah, let's add a library for the front page. And then let's add a library for all these landing pages that we're having to set up. And then another one for our user profile pages, because those are really distinct. And at first this might seem like a great idea, but then you're probably going to see that there's some overlap between the CSS for your front page and for your landing pages, because those things tend to be similar. And so you might end up with more CSS-wise just because you're creating all these libraries. And that might be duplicate CSS that you could eliminate if you didn't use so many libraries and used a more simplistic approach. So just be careful when you're setting up your libraries not to over-engineer things. Another thing to watch out for with libraries is that the whole benefit of using libraries is that they can be contextual. So if you're creating a library that's only being used in the search section of your site, you don't need to add a selector at the top of that, at the top of your SASS file. You don't need to add a selector that nests all the other selectors that specifies that you're on a search page. Because you already know that you're only loading the CSS on a search page, so you can remove that selector from your CSS. So that's something to keep. Yes?
One question. Now, I worked on this and built this in the beta, and I've just recently gone to the stable side here. I remember being instructed that you had to put 4 CSS files and 4 JavaScript files at the end of our libraries in case they couldn't, the opposite, in case they couldn't find the original file, they would default back to the core file. Is that still required?
No, it shouldn't have to be that.
So
yeah. There is a way with libraries to override. You can override core libraries if you want. If you don't want to load an entire library, or if you don't want to load a certain file from the library, there's also a libraries override. Yeah, in the info file, you can specify libraries override, or you can also extend certain libraries if you want to just attach your CSS or your JavaScript to a library that's already being loaded. So libraries is this new tool we have in Drupal 8. But we're still using CSS and SASS, of course, which we talked about already this morning. And just one thing to add to Eric's presentation about organizing your CSS. It's also important to keep in mind if you are using SASS as a tool, and it sounds like a lot of us are, it's still important to reflect on the SASS that we're actually writing. So keep in mind that when you're writing SASS, there is CSS being generated. And if we don't watch out for how we write our SASS, that CSS can become really bloated. We can end up with thousands of lines of CSS, which is not as well written as it could be. So some things to avoid nesting selectors too deep, because you'll probably end up with selectors that are more specific than you actually need. And often you'll end up with CSS that doesn't apply as generally as you would like it to. CSS by hand, you might not actually make your CSS as specific as you do with. So with SASS, we just tend to nest everything when often it's not necessary. And this can make a theme hard to maintain because as you add new components, they won't be automatically styled. So if you're adding some styling for a specific field and you have that nested inside of the CSS for a content type or a view, if you apply the field to some other component on your site, then it will be unstyled. Instead of just adding that selector outside the nesting and having it apply globally. So just something to keep in mind as you're writing your CSS. Templates. So templates are still around in Drupal 8. We were talking about Twig earlier today. And actually in Drupal 8, another change besides the fact that we're using Twig is that we have more core templates than ever before. So if you look in Drupal core, you'll see that we have templates for more things. So things that we used to have to use theme functions to override in Drupal 7, now we can use templates to override them in Drupal 8. So that applies to things like breadcrumbs and the pager. And this is great because it makes our themes more consistent because we have one less way of overriding. You know, you're not using theme functions to override breadcrumbs and then a template to override the node layout. Instead, we always just use templates. How can we make templates that are easier to maintain? Like I mentioned before, if you inherit a project that has 100 templates, it can be next to impossible to change anything on the site without editing 10 different templates. So one approach is just don't create the templates, you know? Use your manage fields, manage display for your content types instead when you can, and just avoid creating templates when it's not necessary. But of course, sometimes we do legitimately need to change the markup of the site, and so we can write Twig templates. And I think we're going to be excited to write Twig templates, right? For those of you who have already created Drupal 8 themes, you know, it's fun writing Twig. It looks nice, it's pretty. And so we can get a little bit carried away. So some techniques. One thing we can do is we can use Twig Blocks. So Twig Blocks are a feature of Twig that let us extend a template. So for example, for Drupal 7, if you were going to have a custom markup for different types of nodes on your site, you'd copy that node template in your theme, and you'd create maybe 5 different versions of it for 5 different content types. Now in Drupal 8, we can use extends to create a template file that's the child of a template file. So we can have a parent node Twig template file, node.html.twig. And in that template file, we can define Twig blocks. So Twig blocks are not Drupal blocks. They have nothing to do with Drupal blocks. Twig blocks are basically just sections of your Twig template file. So in your node template, you might have several blocks that just define the different sections. Maybe you have the header of your node, the main section, and then maybe you have a footer. And let's say for your the article version of your node template, you only want to override what's in the header. So you want to keep most of the display the same. You just want to customize this one thing in the header. Maybe you want to change the social media links or something like that. And so rather than copying and pasting the whole template, you can just add this line at the top of your node article template file that says extends node.html.twig. So this will pull in the parent template. And then you can just include the blocks that you want to override. So if you only want to override the node header block, you can just add this section of markup to your template, and everything else will just be pulled in from the parent template. So this really reduces the amount of code that we actually have to write in our template files if we're creating these child templates. Yeah?
Are you familiar with like how much of that is in, like how many blocks there are in core templates?
Yeah.
A lot of stuff that's already.
There are already, I mean, there are already lots of blocks in core. Like if you look at the page template, there's blocks for like the main section of the page, the header, the footer. So you can already just, without even copying, say, the page template or the node template into your theme, you can already extend the templates from stable or classy or whatever base theme you're using. So this is a great tool, but keep in mind that you're still creating templates. So even though this will mean that our templates can be shorter, it doesn't mean that we're not adding complexity to our site. So it's also something to keep in mind that using this technique makes our templates a little bit less self-explanatory. So it's a little harder to tell what's going on in a template if you're creating a partial like this and only including the block of code that you want to override. So it might make it a little bit more confusing. You might need to add some more comments to your templates to indicate what it is that you're overriding exactly. And another thing to keep in mind with our templates, and this is something that I've seen a lot of in Drupal 7 themes, is that often as themers, we want to really control the display of fields in our content. So in a node template, I'll often see a template file where the themer hasn't output the content array. They've just broken up the content array into all the different components and printed things out separately. So you're creating an event node template and you're printing out the date, and then the location, and then the body, and then the sign up button, and then that's it. And you never print out content, which will have all the other fields that the site builder might have added. And the problem with this is that your site builder might decide to add an extra field. Maybe they decide to add a level for your events, and then this doesn't get printed out. So it's really important in our themes to always be displaying content itself so that everything gets printed out at some point. So we can still break up the different fields as we need to customize the markup, but it's important to go ahead and print everything else somewhere on the page. So with Twig, we have different filters we can use. One of them is the without filter. So this replaces the need to hide and show components of the content like we did in Drupal 7. So with Drupal 8, we still have preprocess functions. And this is one of the main ways that we can customize the logic of the display of content. So you might have lots of different use cases for doing this. And some ways that we can, or some use cases that really make sense would be things like linking one field to another field. So where you want to combine two fields and you want to display them in a way where you need the content of both fields. Or let's say you want to just change the format of the submitted text. Great use case for a preprocess function. Maybe you want to add some variables to the content that are simple, that you just want to put in there. There's also some things that we can do in preprocess functions that are really ugly. So preprocess functions, it's just PHP, so we can do whatever we want. So we can do things like add full-out formatting of field types, really complex formatting logic for displaying our content, where it would be better, simpler, and more kind of elegant to create a formatter as a module, or to use an existing module for formatting our fields. We can also add really complex logic. So some things I've seen are things like per node overrides for the display of different pieces of content. So if you want the FAQ page to look radically different from the About page, why not just add in a conditional for the node ID in a preprocess function? Well, why not indeed? I mean, you could do that, but then as soon as you change those nodes, somebody deletes the FAQ page and adds it again, your site's going to break. So sometimes this logic in our preprocess functions can be really brittle. So with Drupal 8, we still are going to run into this question of whether to put our customizations into a preprocess function or into a template. And often you could do it either way. But typically, if it's something that you're adding that's logic, or you're creating new variables, you want to put something into a preprocess function, whereas if it's just a matter of adding some classes or changing the markup, then you can do it in a template file. So another tool we have in Drupal 8 are view modes. And this isn't a new tool. We were able to create view modes programmatically in Drupal 7 or use the display suite module. But in Drupal 8, it's easier than ever to create view modes because they're built into core. So view modes can be a great tool for displaying content in different contexts on our site. Like if you have content that you need to display in a grid or in a menu, and you want to display it consistently from place to place. But the danger is that we can use view modes a little bit too liberally and then add too much complexity to our themes, especially when we look at our template files. So I've seen a lot of themes where view modes are used as a switch in template files to create a completely different set of output for each view mode. And this can create a lot of complexity because unlike in the configuration where you can decide for each content type which view modes are necessary, which view modes you need to define the field display for. In the template file, it's a little bit less obvious maybe whether you need to customize the view mode or not. So avoiding using view modes as a switch in your template files is probably a good idea. And just using them consistently will help make your theme more easy to understand.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
If you use Twig debugger, does it tell you which theme or template to use?
So you can create separate templates. I mean, do you mean if you create separate templates for each view mode?
Yeah, so if you, yes, correct.
Yeah, so it can tell you which one's being used, but you might just be overriding the display when you don't need to. Like let's say you have the, in your template file, for your, let's say you have a node event template file, and you've overridden the view mode for the teaser view mode. But maybe there's nowhere on your site that you have events that are displayed as teasers. So if you're using the configuration, you might just decide not to override the display of that view mode, but in your template file, because it's kind of separate from your configuration, that might not be obvious. So you might have this logic that creates a set of output that's never displayed on your site. Theme settings. So in Drupal 8, we still have theme settings, and I think it's a sometimes underused feature of Drupal theming. So if you are, I know there's some are there university people here? Do any of you have themes that you've created that are installed on multiple sites? Some of you? Okay, so if this is your use case, if you're using, if you're creating a theme that's not just for one client, but that's actually going to be used maybe for, well, maybe for the same client, but for different projects. You might have variations of your theme. So this is, these are some screenshots from the McGill website. McGill actually has, I think, 800 or maybe now they have 1,000 websites. It's a long list of sites they maintain. And they have a main Drupal theme that they use. And for some of their projects, I think when they were using Drupal 6, they had some sub-themes. So some of their sites, you know, some of their departments or their clients thought that they were really special and that they deserved a sub-theme. So that was a lot of extra code for the team there to maintain. And so what would be easier to maintain would be a set of theme settings that you could use when you're installing the theme to decide that for different installations, the look should be slightly different. So whether the site needs to have a custom logo for the school or the department, or whether their banner is going to be slightly bigger, or whether the home page is going to have a different splash page kind of look and feel. So this was going to be a lot easier to maintain than to have a whole sub-theme for each of those installations. So a couple final things, regions. So we still have regions in Drupal 8, and we still have to maintain our list of regions in our info file, and we still have to make sure that that matches up with the regions that we're actually displaying in our page template. So there's no magic wand that's been added to Drupal 8 that magically makes these two lists match up. So it's up to us as developers to make sure that the list of regions we have in our theme makes sense. And I think I don't think I've come across any theme ever where this list matched up and where the list actually made sense. Usually there's some region that nobody knows why it's there, and you know, just don't touch it, don't put anything in that region. Or you put something in the region and it disappears, it goes off into the ether, you have no idea if it shows up anywhere on the site. So in order to keep your theme kind of lean and also just to have it make sense, it's important to take a look at this list and make sure that everything's there that should be. So I've been focusing on the things that are kind of negative about theming, things that we can do to make our themes complex. So I'm going to wrap up with a list of things that we can do as themers to limit the complexity and make our themes just more robust and easier to pass off to our colleagues or our friends or our future selves. So as themers, we're facing all these sources of complexity. We have these designers creating these lovely designs. We have all this configuration in Drupal. We have the flexibility of the theme system. And then we have all these new tools in Drupal 8 that we're so excited to use. So how can we just make sure that with all of these different things going on, that we're creating a theme that's going to be maintainable? So first of all, it's important to be consistent. So when you are creating your theme, you're going to face lots of choices, whether to do something in configuration or the theme, whether to use a preprocess function or a template file. So just try and be consistent. So try and do things the same way each time you face the same decision. And if you do something differently and there's one kind of exception, maybe make sure that you document that or just add a comment. If you're using view modes, try and define them and use them consistently. So choose names that make sense, things like that. If you're using the Bootstrap theme or a theme that defines some kind of grid system where you have to add classes to implement the framework, make sure that you're using them for all your layouts. So if you decide to use views and you have a grid with views, make sure that you're actually putting those classes into the view. Don't come up with a different grid system for your views grids than the whole rest of your site. This is going to make it easier for the person who might have to maintain your site in the future. Recognize complexity. So there's lots of signs that you can pick up on where there should be an alarm going off saying your theme is getting too complex. So if you're adding template suggestions so that you can create more templates, maybe because you've added 10 different view modes and you decide, oh, I should really create new templates for all these view modes so I can add some template suggestions so that I can do that. So that's a sign that maybe your theme's getting too complicated. If you're adding a lot of classes or IDs to your markup in order to style things more specifically, maybe you've got too much variation going on. If you're adding a view mode for each content type, like you have a view mode for event teaser and another one for article teaser, maybe how you're using view modes doesn't make sense. If you're using a lot of theme settings and your theme is only installed on one site and you don't have any plans to install it somewhere else, your theme is probably getting too complex. If you're using node IDs anywhere in your preprocess functions, if you have a library for each page on your site, these are all just signs that maybe you're doing it too complicated. You should ask yourself regularly how hard this theme is going to be to maintain. So what are different measures of this? You could ask how much work it's going to be to add a new content type. You're creating some styling and you think, okay, if I add another content type, is it going to be completely unstyled? Then maybe I'm not doing things in a way that makes sense. You want to make sure that it's easy for people to add new fields. You want to make sure that if the branding changes a little bit, that it's not going to require recreating the theme. And just keep in mind that it might not be you that's adding a new component in the future. Your client or a colleague or somebody who's actually going to be assessing you on how well you built the theme. Documentation is important. And this is something that's often overlooked or people just don't have time to do, but at least do the documentation that's going to make the biggest difference. So if you have regions that don't get displayed everywhere on your site, that might be something to highlight and document, or if you have preprocess functions that are really complicated. And finally, if you come across a theme that's really complicated, somebody gives you a theme that has 100 templates, this might be your last chance to say, maybe we should refactor this. So don't be so intimidated that you don't consider the fact that you might have to change how things work and you might have to clean things up. And it might be worth putting that time investment in before you start making a lot of changes to the theme. So there's a lot of tools that have been built recently to help with things like upgrades or just creating a site, like testing for the front end. And these tools are really useful for refactoring because they can help you see if anything's changed on the site. So if you want to try to refactor the theme but not actually change the look of the site, these tools can help you just see if there's any, test if there's any changes. So one tool that we use for site upgrades and refactoring is SiteDiff. It's up on our GitHub account at github.com/evolvingweb/SiteDiff. And this is going to show you if there's any pages on your site where there's been HTML changes. And you're able to put in exceptions for things that are supposed to change. And there's lots of visual diff tools out there. You can try backtrack.io. There's lots of other ones, and these will actually use screenshots to visually see what has changed. So that's all I have for you for today. If you want to learn more about Drupal theming, we do have this training coming up on May 17th, and then the intro on the 16th. And just one last shout out. So I'm from Montreal. I came down here for Drupal camp in Atlanta. If you want to return the favor and come up to Montreal, we're doing Drupal North, June 16th to 19th. Montreal is beautiful in June. There's no snow. It's Plenty warm. We have lots of festivals. We have French food, and it's really delicious. And yeah, you won't regret it. So.
There's not going to be any hockey.
No, but well, street hockey. You can always play street hockey. Does anyone have questions about the presentation? Yeah.
So you talked about layouts earlier, how complex they can be. So you talked about how there are different landing pages. Sometimes there are a lot of different landing pages. Did you actually come up with a solution for that for Drupal 8? Like, what did you end up doing? The layouts, or you just kind of using the worst case scenario?
So yeah, it depends who's managing. Like if you're building landing pages, depends who's managing the landing pages and how easy they have to be to edit. That's also a consideration, right? So one solution would be to use something like field collections to create those different decks on the landing pages. And then for each field collection, just to have a couple options for the styling changes. So to say, okay, I want this one to be left aligned, and I want there to be a dark background, and then you have an image upload for the background image, and then you can display that either just with field collections, or you could create a view to display them. But then limiting the complexity is important, because if there's 5 different checkboxes for display options, like left aligned, right aligned, centered, background image is dark, background image is light, you know, it can be too complex even just from an authoring perspective.
You're going after complexity from the standpoint of maintaining so that's the whole point of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think, well, it cannot, I mean, limiting the complexity should also help just with how much time it takes to build in the first place. Although if you have to think more about the process, like it can take a bit more planning initially. But yeah, maintaining, I think, is something people kind of underestimate. So that's where I focus.
I feel like at one point I remember hearing that classy, that there was, with stable there is a commitment that it's not going to change, and that there's less of a commitment with classy. Is that still true, or is that, I feel like, I mean, that was maybe on a podcast I heard that all over a year ago.
You mean between like Drupal 8 and Drupal 8.1?
Yeah.
And 8.2? Yeah. Yeah, for stable, I know for sure that that's the case. For classy, I'm not sure.
On the libraries, you know, you could, I guess, have overlapping or conflicting files that you add. How do you determine the order of precedence? If you have 2 CSS files and 2 different libraries, you go to both of them. Is there a way to see which one, is there a rule, first of all, that sets which one overrides the other, you know, what the orderability is? And then is there a way to determine that on the front end, or a feature to determine that?
Yeah, so you can add your files that you're loading to a grouping like theme or your component, like and that's going to control the weight in which they're ordered.
And you can just do endless groupings. It's not predetermined. It's not just 3 layers. It's whatever you set up. Is that right? And then you can say the weight of them.
No, so it's Drupal that's defined those. So like theme component, these are Drupal things. And then on top of that, you can control the weight. So like within that, yeah. So kind of like with Drupal Add CSS, you could do that. It was somehow more confusing, but yeah. Any other questions? Yeah?
I was just curious, in the example where you showed extending template blocks, is there a performance gain by kind of minimizing the markup? file by extending different, like have the teaser extend the main node block?
Well, the twig gets compiled into PHP. So, I mean, there wouldn't be any performance. There shouldn't be any performance configuration beyond just how long it takes you when you're actually doing it.
I guess I'm more of a fan of not, like, a lot of times we'll have multiple people working on the same project. So,
right.
So if you start to kind of minimize the market, like you said, it's kind of hard. You have to rely on people to make comments in there to say what is intended to happen. I prefer to kind of like not extend things. So you know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
But gain by using the extend option.
The gain is that you're not duplicating the markup. So the gain is just that if you wanted to add something at the top of all the nodes on the site, you wouldn't have to edit 10 different node templates. So that's really what you're doing.
I had another question too. Where you showed the example where without function. So like if you did have a requirement where you need to really kind of force the order of field output, like how can you use a chain together that one without function?
So if you just want to change the order of the fields, the first place I'd try and do that is just in the manage display setting to start with, right? Because there you can order the fields. So if you just print out content in your template, then you'll just print the field in that order. But then beyond that, you could print there's the content array. So if you just put content in the curly braces, it'll just print out all the content. If you do content without, and then a certain field, it'll print it without that part of the content array. And then if you do content dot links or content dot whatever you have in there, then you can print out just one section of it. So just like in Drupal 7, how we had content, and then in there we had this giant array of all these fields and other things. Same thing with Drupal 8. It's just how we're displaying it. Exactly like render. Yeah.
Plus one for theme settings.
Theme settings, yeah.
That's a lot.
Anything else? Comments? Excellent, great. I'll see you all at Drupal or at the training.